by the end of today, at the end of the session, you will understand a little bit about the journey that I took to develop String Babies, and also basically how it works. So the first thing I want to say, it is a holistic teaching approach. We're not just in focusing on learning an instrument, but we're focusing on being musicians. And so it's a very wide, encompassing approach. And this will be revealed as we talk through it. The other thing I want to say is that it's a very friendly approach, in that whatever your background is as a teacher, if you're colour strings, you're Suzuki, you've done Delcros, you've written your own methods, whatever ideas you've got, you will find very, very likely that String Babies sits very well within what you already do, and it will enhance it. You may find there are ideas you will want to take and use within your own teaching. So it's very, should we say, flexible and adaptable. And at the heart of it all is the act of composition. Part of the learning process is very much that the students really from the first day learn how to produce their own music. And again, I will show how this happens. Now, I'm going to just briefly talk about myself, not for very long, because this is not about me. I'm a cellist, I'm a teacher, I'm an adjudicator, and in particularly an adjudicator is a festivals judge. You know, you probably know that we have international festivals. In the UK, I'm a member of a British and International Federation of Festivals. So that's a large part of what I do. And in both teaching and adjudicating, I'm working with students of all ages, of all abilities, of all levels of attainment. So I've been around the block a few times, as you can tell also by my grey hairs. Very importantly, and very pertinent to this, is that I'm also a mother. My children are now grown up, but they both have learning difficulties. And as I had to support them with my late husband, as a mother, we had to break things down for them in their supportive home. And I think that process, as well as a process for myself as a young cellist having to relearn how to play my instrument, you've probably been through that as well, really fed into my experiences, which resulted in this approach. So I've always been interested in the very young students, very attracted to children aged 5 years and under. I think because I like playing, I'm quite playful at heart, would you believe it? But I love young children, and in my mind, this was my first target audience. So I like the age range 5 years, perhaps under, because they are very physically flexible. It's a relatively easier matter to teach good physical habits with care. I do have to stress that, with care. But what I found, and this is over 20 years ago, we're talking getting towards 30 years ago, that I struggled to find appropriate material in the UK at that time to teach them how to be able to comprehend notation particularly. And this was a concern to me, because once they started trying to get to grips with notation, it was a little bit, shall we say, hit and miss. Some could understand, some couldn't. And as a teacher, that was my personal challenge, because I was not satisfied with this. So I started to develop String Babies, working initially with children under the age of 5, both in a school practice where I would be teaching small groups of children, about 4 in number, and also in my own private practice at home. And after about 2 years, I did actually get a sense from parents that I should start collating my worksheets into a book. Now, to speak very briefly, it took me about 10 years to try and convince everybody else in the string teaching community that my ideas actually worked. And 10 years later, they were starting to be accepted. It's a long, long journey. And that came along with a few awards and some, shall we say, recognition from senior teachers. And then we hit the pandemic. And Stringbabies by this time was already being delivered in a few music services in the UK, quite a number of schools, some teachers abroad as well. And I don't know what the pandemic was like for you, but for me it was the worst time of my life. I lost 6 members of my family, and in a 13-month period, including my mother-in-law, my mother, and lastly, my husband, which was the most devastating blow. And so for 2 years after that, I could do nothing, as you can imagine. I was way too traumatized, and so Stringbabies had to look after itself. I couldn't engage with it. And part of my rescue package to try and get myself back of a straight and narrow, so to speak, was to do the ESTA MA course. Now, it's another story, but I did have a hand a long time ago in setting up this course with a number of other people. And it was a postgraduate certificate in strings teaching, and more recently an MA qualification has been put on top of that. And I thought this would be the route for me back to some motivation and sanity, and it certainly worked, but it had an effect on Stringbabies which I couldn't have imagined. So I'm not going to want to embarrass a particular lady here, but this was taken in January when I received my PG certificate.
Cool.
And God willing, I will be picking back the same next year with slightly different colours and receiving my MA. I submitted my final dissertation 3 days ago. So I'm feeling
Yeah! Woo!
Thank you, I'm glad you approve. So, a bit of a journey. So, my first attempt at a book with my husband and my goddaughter providing the rather picture of what is supposed to be a cello was here. I called it Cello Babies because it wasn't violin or any other instrument, and simply I put it in a 3 to 6 year old box in my mind. Okay. The person who helped me immensely, you may have heard of, I don't know if you've heard of a lady called Pat Legg. She's, yeah, a few heads nodding there. So Pat was one of my teachers when I was at the Guildhall and at Trent Park. This is Middlesex University, doing a postgraduate certificate in education. And I knew that my ideas, I had to have the honest opinion of a professional who would speak truthfully to me. And after an afternoon spent with her, she said, "This will work, and I will help you to make it accessible for teachers and parents." And so she advised me that I needed to write a teacher's book to accompany a pupil's book. There are books there you can have a look at your leisure at the end of this talk. But the layout of the pupil's book is very, very different from the teacher's book. You need two together. But the teacher's book tells, page by page, how you go about interpreting each page of a pupil's book. What I didn't expect, though, for a number of years, was that colleagues would start to use it with older children, non-musically literate children, particularly children with learning difficulties. I've been surprised to hear that children with Down syndrome have been able to access notation through using the Stringbabies approach. And I really, you know, we have an expression in England when you're so amazed at something, we say, wow, it knocked my socks off, you know, and I said, yeah, my socks were knocked off and washed. But I heard that even teachers were using it with non-musically literate adults. So adults who had never learned to read music. So that was lovely. And so I got rid of a 3 to 6 year old age range. It was for children, and eventually we had to go for this kind of cover to show that we were universally age friendly. I didn't do anything about the title Stringbabies because it was already out there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't feel comfortable calling it the tuck-up approach. That's my problem with my own ego maybe, but there we go. So, on to the next bit. What does it, and what is, I suppose, its distinguishing results? Well, measurably, over years, we've seen students who take exams become stronger sight readers, very good at oral skills, and they've been scoring as much as 100% in these areas when they are doing exams. And that's right across the board. And because they've become enabled to read music more easily, I suppose is the right thing to say, they've become more independent. So they've been able to investigate music for themselves, not depending on the teacher all the time. They've been able to take in more detail rather than just to have to battle with notes and rhythm. They've been able to comprehend expression markings, bowings, and that's something that has really been a surprise. And somehow it's gone on to this next bit. I hope it'll stay there. Does anybody recognise this diagram? Well, certainly in the UK ESTA magazine, there's recently been an article on spiral learning. Well, as part of my MA, part of research across all the modules has had to look at educational learning processes. And on Mothering Sunday this year, I had a light bulb moment. I realised that Stringbabies was an example of Jerome Bruner's spiral learning in action. The two clearly fit like this. Now, to try and explain this, Jerome Bruner's spiral, you can see basically you're revisiting the same core principles. And oh goodness, why are you doing that? I'm going to go back. Previous, excuse me. You're revisiting the same core principles and just adding information each time. So you're building up basically a spiral of learning. And in the next, you are not playing ball. There we go. Here's an example of it used in an educational setting. I've just picked this off the internet. Just about any aspect of learning, whether it's golf or, I don't know, playing netball or sport or how to do a certain, I don't know, anybody like to suggest as something you could learn?
Tango dancing.
Tango dancing, I'm sure.
We did.
Yes, anyway, there we go. So, so the core principles are just revisited time and time again. So the core principles in Stringbabies, we deal with pitch and we deal with rhythm separately to begin with, and the symbols that represent them. And then we bring them together. This is partially revisiting new information. But at the same time, we're learning a bank of songs, which are based, to begin with, on the perfect fifth. That's the tuning of the cello. And we're also, right from the word go, and this will become more apparent, the student is learning to make their own decisions about the symbols immediately. So I'm going to talk about the first pages of this book. You can see their shapes. That's the first page of a cello book, first page on the right, of a violin book, and I simply thought of shapes. Primary age school children, 3-year-olds, they learn to play with shaped. Have you ever seen these little letter boxes where you post a shape? That's what was in my mind. Very, very simple shapes. And so what I wondered about, and it's something that is still amazing to me, is that children, very, very young children, link shapes very, very easily. And so each string has been linked to a shape. Now, for a very, very young child, there is a step below that. And the first thing we do is we play. And I'll get out some friends of mine. I've been hiding them. There we go. So I like to use, if I'm honest, different size toys. What you don't do if you ever try to do this, if you have a Mickey Mouse or you know, a Donald Duck toy, don't use them. You know, because if you try to say, imagine for a minute this is Mickey Mouse, you say, this is Alice. No, 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 it's Mickey Mouse. So you have to choose a toy with no name, as it were. And the first lesson, I think I can demonstrate with my trusty assistant, Laura, I think. Laura, because she is such a wonderful cellist, she's going to just sit down and pick up a cello, and I'm going to skip to the next bit, which I will say, imagine she's 3 years of age. Thank you. And we take this process really quite slowly. We're not in a hurry, and this could take up a whole first lesson. Now, what I will say is that when I was developing it, it took me 6 weeks to develop what I do in now as many minutes, okay? And I wanted to be sure it worked, not because it was me being a nice and enthusiastic teacher, but because it worked, So, Laura, this is Charlie, and this is Charlie's string. Can you pluck Charlie's string for me? If you put your thumb there. Yeah. And what we do is we place Charlie near Charlie's string. Okay? And we'll pluck that a few times. And then we go to the other extreme. Can I show you Alice? So this is Alice's string. Can you pluck Alice's string for me, please? That's brilliant. Thank you. And what I might do is a little game where I'll just point to one or two of the shapes. And once she's responding beautifully, as she's doing that, we then introduce the inner strings. We're going very carefully. If there's any confusion, we just keep repeating the steps until that level of information, that part of the spiral, is secure. Thank you very much. That's great. Let's give her a round of applause. The next stage, and this, I try to do this now in the first lesson, is to go on to rhythm. So on the left-hand side, tas and tetes. And this is a very common way of using those names. I like it because you can hear what the rhythm sounds like. And this, of course, is very important. I will mention the toys in a minute, but with the rhythms, I chose the quavers because as a young student, I was terrified of them. I don't know if you have these students, they see quavers and they panic. Do you know what I mean? When you get fast float behind you, they go, "Ooh." And I was one of those. So I thought, I'm going to deal with this straight away. They're not going to have any fear of quavers. So that's what we've started with.
Can you remind us which one is a quaver? Because we for example, Holland, we don't.
I beg your pardon. Tete. Tete. Eighth notes, yes. Actually, thank you.
The other one is crotchet, right?
Yeah, actually, quarter note. I'm going to be honest with you, I hate those names.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I forgot that. I do, because what do they mean?
Yeah.
And I forgot that, so thank you. The next time I present abroad, I will avoid that one. So that's thank you very much. I mentioned these toys. They have a different function as well. And I'm going to just distribute them. Please do let me have them back in a minute. But they're nice and soft and squidgy. So they're great for practicing bow holds, riding down the fingerboard with your left hand, helping to shape the hand. Very importantly, they stimulate, because they're nice and soft, they stimulate the nerve endings in your fingers. I have this from a therapist, and actually, if you spent a few minutes covering one of these, and then you picked up your bow, you should notice a difference. You should notice a difference. Would you like to have a bit of fun playing with one? Who else wants one? Shall I throw it out? Thank you. Would you like to have a colour toy for a minute? Thank you. On the right-hand side, we then start bringing the two together. This is going to be a few weeks on for some people. The whole process of doing string babies, I said, this particular level will take maybe between 1 year and 3 years. You don't rush at it. And what I would say, at any again, reiterate, at any stage, if there is any insecurity, you just stick with that stage for a while before you move on. Now, when we're bringing the two together, and this is another important principle, a teacher doesn't hand, say, play that for me. We model what's going on. So we play alongside, we do the exercise along with the student. And so the top line, I want to be absolutely sure that the student can recognize those black and white, black shapes on the white background. I know that some of you may have questions about dyslexia and different colour backgrounds, but I mean, please, if we could leave questions to the end, I'd love to answer everything I can then. We play pizzicato. We don't bow to begin with. That is a technical skill which needs to be treated very carefully and very gradually over some time. So I mentioned about the student being a composer, and I will come on to our tools. It will come up on the slide later, but I use a magnetic whiteboard. And the latest model of magnetic shapes look a bit like this. So I'm going to hold that up for you, and I'm just going to plonk on some random shapes. Here we go, in a random order. And this would happen typically in a first lesson. I might actually, even with a student, when they're playing with, they've got the toys in front of them, if they're that young, they will spend some time with the shapes by the toys, so they have some reference. We won't go straight to here. You've really got to make sure that every stage is very gradual and filled in, so to speak. And with a student, with no speed, no pressure, they pluck the string, and I'm pointing, directing their eyes, because as you probably appreciate, it is not natural to read from, and I've got to be careful here, left to right. I have to say that because I'm ambidextrous. I have to think about it for a minute. We also start with a greeting song. The lesson, actually, before we even get to the shapes, before we even sit down with cello, we sing a greeting song, and this is done every week, and it's a very simple song. Again, like in Bruner's spiral, it can be come back and be reapplied with different levels. So you might like to join me. Now, if you're a cellist, when I get to, I'll say cello. If you're a viola player, you say happy. If you're a violinist, you say fiddle. Okay, you'll understand why in a minute, but it goes, hello, everyone, join us in the cello song. Ready to join me? Here we go. Yeah. Hello, everyone, join us in the cello song. And and we do so. As you know, it's a universal system which was developed by Kodai recently, I say in recent years. Actually, as you know, it goes back a long way, back to the UK. But this was part of my childhood, which is quite unusual in the UK. In Scotland, they do it all the time, but not so much in England. I was lucky. And even in my earliest teachings, I was always trying to use solfa somehow. So we spend a long time with songs with based on the perfect fifth, and I'm going to show you another couple. So we've got the Hello song here, presented on 2 lines, and on the left, the cello. I wanted to break away. There's a few little open string songs based on A and D in the previous pages, but I wanted to present it on 2 lines. So we're not just reading horizontally, we're reading this way as well. And I realise I've skipped a little bit of a stage, because this is the important thing about composing. When the student has the lesson, the shapes on the board, I give the board to the student and they can rearrange the shapes. Now, you're not going to get a huge variety. You're only going to get a limited amount of, shall we say, possibilities. However, they are still making a decision, and then they go back and play it. And it's been wonderful to hear of toddlers at home going and making shapes and rhythm sticks with things like green beans and dog biscuits. We have in England, we have some dog biscuits called shapes, and they are shaped biscuits. And they use their crayons and they try drawing them at home, which is wonderful to hear. So the impact is obviously going across, should we say, the educational board. What they write their own rhythms. We use a dry white marker, and they can draw their own rhythms. Then they can bring the 2 together, and I'll just show you an example. So up here, and I'll show you, this is a violin shape. Don't think about the way the notes are orientated for the moment, or the strings, but they learn to read it like this. And the first thing we will do is we'll check that we've identified the string correctly, that they know this, and then we will play through this, and we'll say the rhythm first. So again, we're just reinforcing before they attempt to play it. They will play pizzicato to begin with. If there's a slight delay in that, they don't quite produce it and it sounds rhythmical, I don't worry at this very early stage. If they can say the rhythm rhythmically, then I know that the connections that enable them to play rhythmically will catch up. It's whether they know in their mind what it should sound like is important. And so once we're now on to composing in 2 lines, we don't spend very long on this stage at all, but it's a very important stage. And the beauty of singing all these songs in fifths and Hello song is that in a very short amount of time, the student begins to understand how their cello is tuned. And I have a lovely story, it stays with me. I teach a young man, beautiful young man now, 16 years of age, but when he was 4 years, and so he's been with me a long time, after about 2 lessons, he came to me looking with a very worried look on his face. Oh, Mrs. Tucker, there's something wrong with Charlie. Charlie being the C string. He's sick. And he's unruffled. Well, I was delighted because he recognised there was something wrong. I was delighted. So I'm going to show you very briefly, oh yes, why have I shown it differently for violin? Again, you'd have to go, I can't go into it now, but with a violin I realised that you've got 2 strings which go below the bottom line of a 5-line stave. So I thought I've got to deal with that problem first, or that issue first. So I have to show you what is the #1 hit in Stringbabies' repertoire, Kippers and Custard. I found out on ChatGPT that there actually is a recipe for kippers and custard. Would you believe it, by Jamie Oliver? I thought I couldn't believe it. Anyway, here we go. So how do you fancy your sight reading or sight singing? Kippers and custard. Here's the challenge. When we get to yuck, you do a soft yuck if you can restrain yourself. But let's sing the rest of it loudly, shall we? Here we go. Kippers and custard, sausages and mustard, cooked in a big pot, all for tea. However, when we're doing it on the cello, this could be our first experience with a bow. They can sing it. I might sing it to them. When we get to the yuck, we do this. They love that. I still remember some years ago working with teachers in Cornwall, which is in the far southwest of England. And I was very brave. I said, just give me any child who's never touched a cello before. And they sat here. I told them what they were going to do as I was teaching them. And bless them, everybody was singing this song. When we got the yuck, you could see the excitement. They couldn't wait to make this disgusting sound. And it's important to have a freedom to explore the different sounds a cello can make, including the not so pretty ones. I think that's important. But as you can imagine, it's a little bizarre. I don't know how it would translate into Dutch. I'm sure, keeping the same rhythm, we could think of some nice, disgusting words, as it were. But 3 lines is the next stage, and this is a very, very important stage. So at this point, I got to, with my first students, I thought, how do I get from there, presenting all these notes on 3 lines, how do I get through to conventional, normal notation? And I was pondering on this for a long time, I didn't know. And it was answered for me by accident. So, we have some esteemed friends here who wrote a lovely book called Cello Time Joggers, and I took one of their pieces and I rearranged it in shape notation. And my little 4-year-old boys loved it, no problem. I left it on the stand, and as I was packing the toys away, ready to teach my next student, who was 12 years old, around Associated Board Grade 2 level, she just walked in, sat down with her cello, and she started playing it perfectly, just sight ready. And then she suddenly said, "Oh, Mrs. Tucker, they're shapes, and there's only 3 lines. That's not what I thought it was. That's awfully clever." And I went, yes, this is it. So the next week, I brought in a book of conventional music, the biggest print I could find. And we started doing little things, hunting for familiar things like a bass clef and a tar and a tate. And I was amazed that actually they were getting it. What I realized, and this is a very important principle, is that normal notation and this notation work alongside each other. You should not expect to go through the Stringbabies book and then they'll be able to read music. You have to bring in conventional notation if that's the route they're going to go down, which of course most musicians would want them to. And so this is, very important to remember. But this is how we did it, just saying, let's have a look for the bass clef, look for the tar and the tate in some conventional music. And there's a lovely publication, Australian book, Flying Start, which I particularly like because it's large print, but they also have pages which are dedicated just to reading simple rhythms on one string. And that's been a really good way in for the very, very youngest students. Often I'm running to other conventional books like cello time joggers, for instance. There's so many which are very, very popular and beautifully presented, I have to say. So, one point I've noticed is that when we've moved on with a student onto 5-line notation, which you don't really need until you start introducing the left hand, you actually, so one or two had troubles making the transference, and we found out that actually they had an issue like dyslexia. Now it's a very, very, one term covers a broad range of learning disabilities, so to speak. I don't like the word disability, but learning needs, shall I say. And a lot of my colleagues have been able to advise a classroom teacher, I think our student has a problem. Can we perhaps investigate? And I would say every time there's been an issue uncovered of dyslexia. And as I said, with Down syndrome students, they often stay with this kind of notation, and they've been able to access the rest of the repertoire through using it. So with dragonflies and frogs, you can see we're also introducing a few new concepts. Again, thinking about the spiral. By this stage, we've introduced a bass clef, we've introduced a rudimentary time signature, down the bow and up bow signs, which I prefer to call push and pull actually, and then also retakes as well. And again, you don't need 5 lines until we start introducing the left hand. And by that point, as you can tell, it's virtually indistinguishable from conventional music. And then you can start gradually, in tandem with the development of left-hand technique and with bowing technique, start bringing in other elements. And this you can explore in the book. But at every stage in every lesson, very importantly, the student makes up a composition or is working on one, and they love doing that. They love having an input, and perhaps I've not stressed this enough, but you'll find on every page of a book, every so often, there is a little place where the student can try writing down some of their notes. Sometimes they need a little bit of help to do that, but they're owning the music. And I think it's, a testimony that it works that one of my early Stringbabies pupil is now a professional composer, and I interviewed her as one of 6 composers for my recent MA. I will talk about that if I have time in a minute. So, the first lesson. Equipment you'll need. I think we've gone through this. Magnetic shapes, magnetic board, 4 soft toys of different size I would recommend, dry white markers and cloths, instruments, lots of enthusiasm, smiley face. And don't be frightened of getting down on your knees, because, especially on the cello, they are weak. And here's how a first lesson might run. Now, God willing, it will work. I've got a little 3-minute film that I can show you, which it literally encapsulates these major stages. Is from an era of about 6 years ago. I have undergone a slight transformation in appearance, you will notice, but that's not important. I want to talk about the MA though, very briefly. So my research dissertation has been on encompassing composition with the intermediate cello students, so we're talking about grades 5 to 6. Integrated it into a lesson with the view of enhancing creativity and instrumental learning. And besides finding out how Stringbabies works, it's made me realise that it's actually not that difficult. I don't think it's that difficult to make composition a mode, a vehicle for learning. I don't think it's too difficult. And that's where I shall be going next with Stringbabies. I now realise that this whole box of Stringbabies is just the foundation of a much bigger approach, which I'm going to be unwrapping probably for the rest of my life, whatever long I have left of it. So here we go. I'm going to show you this film. At the end I'll leave up a little timeline, which if you want to read, tells you a little bit about Stringbabies' development and how it, over a period of time, you might want to do that. Please have a look at the books. Please don't take them away. I'm going to be here until Saturday afternoon. So if you have any questions, because I realise we haven't got time for Q&A, come and call on me. Please do. Very happy to talk. So I'm going to go onto this film. The Stringbabies programme was developed with 3 to 6-year-old children in mind. And I've been really surprised in the way that it's been used and embraced by older beginners, children with special needs, children who've had difficulty entering music, and even non-musically literate adults. And over the years it's gained a strong reputation in enabling all music students to be able to sight read effectively and strengthen oral skills, and also learn to compose alongside playing the violin, viola or cello. So every lesson begins with a hello song, which is based on the perfect fifth, the interval to which the violin, viola and cello are tuned. And within a few weeks, a student will be able to tell you whether the instrument is in tune or not. Do, do, so, so, do. The first step in teaching notation is to link a toy with each string. Charlie! Fantastic! These toys are then superseded by shapes. Let's get off it. Ready? Simple rhythmic symbols come next. The crotchets and quavers are easiest to teach on a stringed instrument. Sight reading and composition are key elements in Stringbabies. Here a student is learning to compose on one line. Kivers and Custard is one of the most popular songs in Stringbabies' repertoire. It seems wherever it's played, it's a favourite song with the students. The song reinforces the idea of a perfect fifth. The one-line stuff is superseded by a two-line and then three-line stuff. Here we see a student composing on a three-line stuff. Through following the Stringbabies programme, students become well-rounded musicians and independent learners with above-average abilities in sight reading and oral skills.
Our son's been coming to Stringbabies for 6 months now, and he's still quite resilient and really focused on it, and seems to be making a lot of progress. I really like the fact that it combines technique with a bit of composition and quite an open approach to the whole thing, a very rounded musical approach.
Susanna started when she was 3.5 with Kay. That meant that she could just completely develop at whatever speed she wanted to develop, which has been fantastic. So she has a love of music, but Kay's teaching has really brought that out of her, and without Kay, she wouldn't be where she is today.
Please do feel free to get in touch with us at stringbabies.com. And there you have it. So, thank you. Your kind attention, as you know, you can call me and just talk. I think we're on the time. Wow, on time. So I don't know about you, but I'm in a cup of tea.
Yes,
So,
a cup of tea.
thank you very much.
Thank you.